Hello there. Welcome to the IWS podcast. This is RJ, your host, and I have a very special guest today, my man Anthony Cook. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. I'm glad to have you here. I wanted to, of course, build on the conversation we started to have offline last week. You know, the platform is largely focused on mental health. A lot of it is about representation and really trying to be accessible and reach out to the youth, to the younger men out there who don't know a lot of the different lived experiences that we have, the careers that we pursue, the families that we build. And so being able to have other men of color to talk about those experiences are a large focus of the platform. And so I want to start, if it's okay, with asking you a bit about your upbringing and the family dynamic of your environment that you grew up in.
Sure. I'm just gonna rip that band-aid off, right?
Yes, sir. Right. Let's dive in.
So I'm a man of color, but I'm biracial. My mother's white. My father's family is black. Um, all kinds mixed out over there, from
Yeah.
Africa to Jamaica. So we've got the African Caribbean connection. My mom's side of the family, if I remember correctly, is Irish and German.
Oh, wow.
Um, I grew up at grade school. It was my mom and my dad in the house. My dad was military. My
Mm,
mom has been a paralegal as long as I can remember. He was in the Navy, so we bounced around a good little bit when I was younger. But very quickly that diverted. It was about, I think I was third grade, third grade, and it's kind of where my memories start of my childhood. I don't remember
yeah.
a lot prior to that, but childhood trauma, that kind of, you forget
Mm-hmm.
everything up to that because those things kind of stand out. So some of the key memories that I tend to talk about, that kind of led to the split between my mom and my dad was, my dad at the time was selling dope in Washington D.C. That was
Mm-hmm.
the naval base that we was on. It was in Maryland, and I actually remember going. I didn't tell you this. I actually remember going on some runs with him too. As an
Oh,
adult
wow.
now, I realized what he was doing, but as a kid, I just thought we was dropping him off wherever he was trying to go to work. I mean, he was going to work, but not the kind of work that I thought he was going to
Correct.
work.
Correct.
Um, there was a moment I was in a car with him and his boys, and they was just passing around the crack pipe, put that to my mouth. My dad, wasn't just hustling in the streets selling dope. He was hustling with other females too, even though he was married to my mom. So he used to take me
Mm,
and my younger brother, who I didn't mention. So it was my dad, my mom, and my younger brother. I'm gonna get to my sister in a minute. Um, he used to take us over to this one lady's house, and that was the last lady I believe he was with.
mm,
That I can remember that he cheated on my mom with. But I remember walking upstairs. She had a son. We was kind of hungry, needed something to eat. I was in an unfamiliar place. I'm trying to figure out like what we can get into. So I
yeah.
walked upstairs to ask my dad what was going on. They was on the bed smoking crack, whatever the case is. And then the last little two pieces, there's two more. I don't know why they fought. I've talked to my dad and my mom about it. They have different stories as an adult, but
Sure.
I remember my dad coming home just super agitated. And the argument kind of went in this square. It went through like the hallway. Right when you walk in, off to the side of the hallway was some stairs that went upstairs, a bathroom. The hallway led into the family room den area. Off to the left was the dining room. They're following that around. When you come in past the dining room, the pantry's off to the right, and now you're into the kitchen. That's when I see my dad grab my mom, and now they back out into that hallway where they started at. Bro, he knocked her clean out. Like, I know
Wow.
this is not what happened, but like as a kid, this is how I remember it. I remember blood flinging off her face onto the wall.
Mm,
And he was on top of her, hitting her. So I jumped on his back trying to protect my mom, and he hit me. He flung me up against the wall. And
wow.
I think it was at that moment when he realized what he did to his son, not necessarily his wife, but his son. He kind of backed off, And I remember the police coming and taking him away or whatever. And my mom moved around a lot. At that point, we tried to stay up north just because she was working for some prominent law firms and such.
Yeah.
And it was shortly thereafter they tried to like reconcile stuff. So this is my last memory of my father before we came down to Florida.
Okay.
Uh, Playing Super Mario Brothers. I hadn't seen my dad for a minute, and he came into the house, and I was like, "Dad, you want to sit down with me and play?" And he was like, "Nah, I ain't got time for that," and he left. So I remember a few days later, my mom woke us up, and she was like, "Grab everything you can, we're leaving." So we just half the house we left, like literally just left it there. I
Wow.
don't have baby pictures. I don't have pictures when I was young. There's very few that I've collected over the years
Yeah.
that I hold on to that I've kind of gathered from family and stuff. But like we came down here with nothing. We hopped on
Wow.
a train. Uh, that came down here to Florida. I met my white family for the first time because up in DC, that's where my black family lived. I didn't even know I my mom was white, but I didn't even know I had a white family. Like that just
Right.
didn't register in my little mind. So I met her parents, and I meet this young lady that they had that was introduced to me as a cousin. But my mom low key said, "This is your sister." I didn't even know I had a sister. I was in third grade before I found that out. And good people, but there was definitely some racism that was existent. So the story starts to come out about how my mom even ended up north with my dad and our black family. When she married a black man, they disowned her. They was like, "You ain't a part of this family no more." Which is why we never met them. Um,
Right. Right.
and my sister came from a previous marriage, so she's my half sister. And so when my mom got married, she kind of gave up the rights, parental rights, to her dad at the time, and then her
Wow.
dad gave up parental rights to my grandparents, my mom's parents. So they had been raising Roxanne was her name. They had been raising her for as long as I've known.
Wow.
Um, so it was this weird dynamic because we was up north and I was around a lot of I always had in my mind like being down in DC and being around my black family, like super intelligent, right? DC is the hotbed of
Right.
black
Right.
intelligence, you know what I mean? So I just remember all these professional women in my life, and like my black family is super intelligent, super sharp, just with it. I mean, my grandma's in her 70s right now, and she just launched her own business. Like she just
Wow.
ended up
Shout out to grandma.
yeah, they stay. She retired. She worked for the Pentagon, retired like 3, 4 years ago, and then in COVID, she was like, "I'm gonna open up my own business," and has been thriving ever since. Like that's just how my black family
That's
moves
awesome.
like that, man. They just always hustling and doing things. But when I came down here and was with my white family, we lived with my mom's sister and her husband and two cousins. So it was the four of us in a bedroom. My mom slept in one bedroom and my aunt and uncle in another bedroom. And they were
Mm.
violent too, man. They used to get into fights all the time. I remember one time my aunt was on one side of the living room, my uncle was on the other. They fighting, cursing at each other, cigarettes hanging out their mouth. My aunt picked up a fresh pot of coffee and threw it across the living room at him and smashed on the wall and stuff. So I
Ooh.
came up in it wasn't like violence all the time, but it was significant enough for me to
Sure.
remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my white family, like they was racist, man. It was times my aunt would come over when we finally moved out and got our own place. It's times she come over to the house. My mom was working 3 jobs, so she went home. She was trying to do the best to provide for us.
Right.
My aunt will come over in a drunken stupor, be banging on the door. I'm we could say stuff, right? Like I'm not
Yeah.
cursing, but I'm about
No,
to say
no.
something.
Hey, yeah, we can
That's all right.
speak freely. We can speak freely. There's an adult
Okay.
here.
Okay. Just want to make sure. I want to make sure. She come over to the door, knocking, banging, talking about, "Come outside, you nigger lover." She
Wow.
say stuff like that all the time, man. Like I don't know. It was a mess. And then going with my grandparents, my grandpa, I used to tell when I got old enough, I was about 18, 19. I was like, "Mom, I don't want to go down there no more." He used to make me legit, man, pick like rose bushes, clean the house. Uh, I felt like he was treating me like a slave. That's what it felt like.
Wow.
And again, they were good people. I think there was generational things that was going
Yeah.
on, and they just kind of thought one thing. My grandma, I know she loved me to death, but it just was very uncomfortable there. It'd be times my sister would call us a nigger and stuff, and I didn't like
Mm,
being down there, you know. But
yeah.
that was what we had because we left from up north. So fast forward, my dad calls. I hadn't seen him for years, just down here living, doing stuff with my mom. I was helping my mom clean hotel rooms from third grade all the way up to like eighth grade. But my dad reaches out to us when I hit fifth grade, and I start to realize what's going on because he would call collect all the time. He got locked up. He got sentenced 53 years.
Wow.
Um, and so I didn't have a relationship prior to him being locked up. That last time I seen him was when I was playing Mario Brothers, and he was like, "I ain't got time for this, son."
Right, right.
So he got convicted up in Virginia. We were down here in Florida. So my relationship with my father was built with him being locked up behind bars on collect phone calls and us being able to visit him maybe like once a year until we got him moved down here to Florida when I was in high school. I think it was the latter years of my high school time. So um, I will say one of the good things about my relationship with my dad is my dad did he got saved when he was in prison and did introduce the Lord to me. I was about 13. And to be quite honest, like that probably is what saved me. Because at that point, I I was a good student, but I had a nasty little attitude. And it wasn't, I was super quiet. But the
Hmm.
thing is, like when I told you I moved around a lot up north, especially, my mom would try to put us in good schools, which were predominantly white. And within the first week, it was some white kid calling me a nigger or my brother. So they was catching these hands real quick, and I would
Right,
get kicked out all the time. And then we did talk a little bit about this. My mom, so I was at these white schools. I was too dark for them, right? My
right.
mom put me at a black school. That was the last place that we were at before we moved down here to Florida, and they was going in on me at the black schools, and I'm having to fight people that I'm like, wait a minute, I'm one of y'all. Like, what's going on? And then
Right.
I moved out here to Florida, and I'm at this school. It was he ended up being a good friend of mine in high school, but it was an Asian dude. He done called me the N word, so he had to catch these hands too. So I was like constantly just my emotional regulation was very low. So certain
Yeah.
things would just set me off, and I would just fight. I got kicked out in fourth grade for knocking my fourth grade teacher out. I was fighting a kid that called me the N word. Somebody grabbed me. I thought it was his boy. So I just turned around swinging. Man, it was my 60-something-year-old fourth grade teacher. I done laid
Wow.
her out. So they kicked me out in fourth grade as well. So had I not been introduced to my faith journey at that time, I probably would have ended up down the same path. As I said to you before, it
Yeah.
was a time where my dad was locked up. He just got out 2 years ago. My brother was locked up my senior year. My mom was locked up. So I'm literally the only one that hasn't been locked up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when I got saved, I stayed busy with church. I was in high school now at this point. So I was basketball, track, cheerleading, chorus, uh, fellowship of Christian athletes. Like I just stayed busy. So there was no room for me to get in trouble. And because I was involved in so much, I had to adjust my attitude because
Of
I would have
course.
lost all of those things if I was getting kicked out. So
Yeah. No, that's
um
absolutely important.
I th- I think that covers most of my upbringing,
I mean,
unless we
that
can get into adulthood, but that's the kid stuff right there.
no, no, no. But that's a lot to to digest. I
Yeah.
appreciate all the transparency there because you did cover a lot. I mean, I can definitely imagine that there's a lot of young men out there in particular that can relate to that type of story. You know, especially if we just break it down in the context of those of us that don't have fathers in our homes or in or don't have a prevalent role in our life,
Yeah.
right? Which you were making that point off and on.
Yeah.
And to take it a step further, right? Even when you were talking about, to try to couple in with that, we'll get deeper into this, the identity aspect. When you were talking about when you have two different ties of your family that aren't from the same racial or ethnic background, and how sometimes that can play in how the children are treated, or in your case, severely mistreated. I would say that's severe mistreatment. I mean, obviously, you can't be
Hmm.
thrown on the N word like
Yeah.
that and think it's not going to play on a young man or young woman's mind, right? And then and it's interesting when you were describing that. So you were talking about how your family would say that to you, but then in this, and obviously, like I didn't hear you. At least there's a different example. I didn't hear you say you put hands on them. But then in all these examples in school, people are saying the same thing. You're like, everybody got to get the business.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, like, that to me, when you explain that, like in the order that you explained it in chronologically, that makes perfect sense why you were so sensitive. Not just because the word is power, we already know that part, but the fact that you're being mistreated with that word being weaponized against you in your home with your
Mm,
family that,
yeah.
obviously you didn't grow up with your whole life, but, you spent some time with them. Then you're in school and these people are using it to antagonize you,
Hmm.
right? Or your
Yeah.
brother. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. Like, the reason why I make that point is because sometimes we're not as aware of the environments that we come up in and how it shapes our perception of ourselves and of our reality.
Yeah.
So the way we behave with people is different. Like that to me was a beautiful example of how, if you're mistreated so much, you're going to act out in other ways. You might not be able to act out in your home, right? Because you might be in a hostile environment where somebody will check you, like a man may check you
Yeah.
if you're a young man.
Yeah.
But in school, when you got your peers, you're like, hey, you better not talk to me like that, because you're gonna get the business if you think that I'm gonna let that slide. Because I'm
Yeah.
already being mistreated over here at home. You're not
Yeah.
about to do that to me over here. You get what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. 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 You know what? All the years of therapy and stuff, I have never made that connection until you just now articulated
Oh
that.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. I get it because of the work that I've had to do and also the environments I came up in. Like, I grew up in a lot of these hostile environments when I was young, and seen a lot of young men who didn't have fathers around, who their moms were primarily raising them. And a lot of times they're wild, and it's not, I don't think it's because young men don't respect mothers or nothing like that. I think it just goes to speak to the importance of having the male figure
Hmm.
in their life. Their
Hmm.
father is the most ideal person to have, even if the two of us aren't together, to still play a significant role, if you get what I mean. Because sometimes I don't want us to misconstrue, well, it wasn't a healthy relationship, like you were talking about, you were describing, right? Your mother and
Yeah.
your father, that wasn't a healthy relationship. So we don't necessarily want those people staying together just for the sake of the children, or just staying together because it's
Yeah.
going to negatively impact them. Because,
Yeah.
right, because the stories you're telling is not what I'm sure you want, which we'll get into later, your children to be telling those stories, which I'm sure
Yeah.
they would never. But we know how that can play on you and on your mind. And so, to that point, I think it's better to have the father present, because more often than not, the child may be with the mother. But
Yeah.
if it's an unhealthy relationship, we don't need to be living in the same house. We don't need to be in a romantic relationship, but we need to collaborate and co parent
Yeah.
effectively. I deal with
Yeah.
that a lot.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to make that point for those out there that may be in that type of situation, because your lived experience sounds like it can negatively impact the way that children behave outside of the home because of what you're forcing them to witness and observe. I don't know if you
Yeah.
would agree with
No,
that.
I know I totally agree with RJ. Like when you're saying that, especially for people listening, the research so there's two parts to this. I focus really on fathers, but the
Hmm.
research on having an absent parent and the detrimental effects it has on kids it, it's one of the saddest things ever.
Yeah.
But even more than that is when you have an absent father. People don't realize how important the father figure is in a
Oh
house.
yeah.
To have a present, actively engaged father, the positive impact that that has. And when you remove that, the outcomes for both female and male children,
Yes.
it's bad, man.
It's
It's bad.
disastrous.
It
I
really
know.
is.
No, I agree with you. And that's part of what I talk about in therapy with I get a lot of male clients that you can imagine. I get a fair amount of fathers. And obviously I get also young men that I kind of touch on a little bit. But I deal a lot with co-parenting, and because I co-parent myself. And so I think a lot about the necessity, right? So in some cases you'll hear where maybe one side may say, and I'll, to be frank here, I don't really hear men say that. I never really heard a man say, I don't need his mother. Like, I've never heard that in my life ever.
Yeah.
But I have heard some women say, we don't need his father.
Yeah.
And I'm here to confront that and try to debunk that, because I see, just like I think you see, the importance of it. A lot of these young men out here that, run the streets, that are involved in gang violence, that are overly aggressive and hostile in their day-to-day life, a lot of that comes from that lack of that male presence and male leadership. Because
Yeah.
we number one, we don't condone that, but we demand that level of respect, not through necessarily through violence, but through respect.
Yeah.
I give what I want to get. I respect my son, so I expect respect in return because I
Yeah.
give it.
Yeah.
And then I need you to exude that everywhere else you go. You don't disrespect your mother, you don't disrespect your teacher, you don't disrespect your peers or other adults around you. Because I'm telling you, because I give it to you freely
Yeah.
and I make that choice, and you then respect me, that you're going to respect the wishes that I'm giving to you, the expectations that I'm giving to you.
Yeah.
That's what I believe.
Yeah.
But when you take that away and you expect what I have seen, this is just me, this is more on the therapy side talking now. Young men, there comes a point, and I think it's primarily in adolescence, where if there's a young man and his single mother, he's going to start pushing her buttons. He's going to start challenging her to a point that she starts getting overly stressed and frustrated with him, and many times doesn't know what to do with him. And I
Hmm.
don't think it's because, again, young boys like hate their moms or they just want to be combative. I think that's what happens, to your point, when you remove that element of that male role model, which is predominantly we would want it to be their father, their bio father. That's the risk that you take.
Yeah.
That's the games that we end up playing, and it ends up setting up that young man down a path that we might not be able to bring him back from, right?
Yeah.
Especially if he ends up inside the juvenile justice system or the adult prison and jail population. Like, I spent a lot of time studying that in college. It's very hard to save them once they've been in. The better
Hmm.
thing is to prevent them, right, from getting in their pretrial diversion programs and stuff like that.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I just say that just to emphasize that point, because I really think that's important. I don't want anybody to think that I am trying to prop up fathers more than mothers. But what I am saying is they're equally necessary and important. I don't know if
Absolutely.
you want to add anything to that, or if
No,
you're good.
absolutely. I mean, even developmentally, right? Adolescents, that's what they do. We're boundary testers, right? In
Correct.
adolescence. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where you that balance is so important. And to your point, right? It's not one is more important than the other. Both are equally important. And if people are out there and they find themselves in a situation where they can't be in relation with parent, mother, father, we do know what the research shows. If there is a mentor of that
Sure.
gender, that still provides some of that teaching, that positive impact that we would want to have in our children's lives. So,
Absolutely.
and that's why mentoring is so important. We don't have people talk about it, but there's not too many established here in Central Florida like that, where we could say, yeah, let's get our kids here, let's get them mentored and things
Yeah.
like that. But no, I'm with you. Ideally, we want both, right? But if we can't
Yeah.
have parent, then are there mentors within the community that maybe we connect our kids with, male and or female, depending on uh, I would say it's for both. Like if it's a male child, they need both because they need to figure out the masculine and the feminine. And if it's
Correct.
daughters, then they need to figure out both as well, right? So we
No.
want that balance for sure. No, I'm with
No.
you on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny you say that too, because that's been a lot of my personal experience as I've gotten older. Like, I've always sought out mentors, and I've been a mentor for a long time. Both in I'm from Gainesville, so back then, the Boys and Girls Club was like a haven for a lot of us. Some people went to the
Mhm,
YMCA, but that was a little
mhm.
expensive. So the Boys and Girls Club was where a lot of us went. Right, play ball. You were able to play pool, ping pong, get some tutoring, and then just kind of have fellowship with other kids your age, whether y'all went to the same school or not. Which a lot of cases we did.
Yeah.
So that was cool because it kept you out of the street. So that was good. I'm always a big supporter of the Boys and Girls Club. I was there from like middle school up until I was probably a junior, I think. And so that definitely helped a lot with not putting myself in situations that I probably shouldn't have been in. So organizations like that are great. I've done Big Brothers Big Sisters of Central Florida. When I moved here, I was there for a long time. Still have a young man that I've basically been with him since he was in fifth grade, and he's like 21 now. So
Nice.
definitely been on a journey with him in and out of the school system. But going back to your point earlier, because this is important, talking about absent parents. I don't know if I mentioned this to
Hmm.
you before, but like, my mom passed away when I was young from brain
Hmm.
cancer. And
Hmm.
so one thing that I had to learn is to try to fill in that gap, because I knew, for example, my father also was a Navy man. he was very strict, like what a traditional Black man in a lot of places is, you know, corporal punishment, you know, very hostile,
Hmm.
very tense environment. You don't talk back, you don't speak back, you do what you said without any further explanation or justification. And so I grew up feeling very uncomfortable most of the time. Like I would, if I had to kind of diagnose myself back then, I would say I probably had generalized anxiety because anytime my father was home, I was on edge
Hmm.
because that's the environment that he created. It's like
Hmm.
any little thing that went wrong, you're probably getting a beating for.
Hmm.
So I knew when I was becoming a father that that was no part of what I wanted to do because I knew how much I despised it, you know. But then going back to missing my mom, so it was me, my older sister, and my father. One great thing about what I think family can do, if you're fortunate enough to have family there, is and also both my sides of family are different. Mom's side's Latina, dad's side's Black. So I grew up primarily with my father's family because that's who I live with. But I went to go visit my mom's family a lot. They were down there in Tampa, most of them, not all of them. And so, and a lot of them were women. A lot of them were my aunts. So shout out to them and my grandmother who's no longer with us, but they tried to bridge that gap a lot. And it was helpful. I didn't realize it 100% at that time, but they gave me a lot of that warmth and empathy and compassion that
Hmm.
I needed, you know, to
Hmm.
be a little softer. I got a lot of hardness
Hmm.
from dad. They gave
Hmm.
me a bit of that softness that I needed. They supplemented that. It's not the same, as you
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
but it helped.
Yeah.
So when you are missing that, I think it's important, you know, if you can, to seek those things out. Mentorship probably is the easiest to where we can have a little bit of autonomy to try to seek it out. You know, family, you don't get to pick that. So, you know, you're at the mercy of whatever you're born into. I was just
Yeah.
fortunate in that particular way. But mentorship, you absolutely can. You know, if you verbalize that, maybe I've seen, for example, when I did Big Brothers Big Sisters, I started off in the school. Like I didn't go to the community side first. I started off like in the classroom with one child. We got really cool. And then ironically enough, because I actually don't really tell this story a lot, but the guy, his name is Cody, the guy that I've been with now, is a man now, he was in that classroom. And me
Mm.
not being a teacher, and I'd also realized there's not a lot of men in schools
Mm-mm.
in general. Like a lot of men are not teachers. Most teachers are female. And
Hmm.
so, me being in the school, naturally in the classroom, a lot of the boys gravitated to me of all ethnic backgrounds, that they all gravitated to me because they're not used to having a man around.
Hmm.
So, that was really cool. Felt like a rock star every time I got to go there,
Hmm.
especially during
Hmm.
lunchtime. But the young man that I've been working with for the longest period, he was in that classroom. And the guy that I went there for, we basically did the school year and he was like, okay, I think I'm in a better position. Like, thank you for all your support. And then the other guy, he asked me because he knew I was he actually asked the other guy permission. He was like, hey, can he be my big brother? Because I still need somebody.
Hmm.
And so I ended up taking him on and then we came out of the school and then I was just like going to his house and taking him around and stuff like that. But I know the power of that. Like I know the power again, representation,
Hmm.
visibility,
Hmm.
access.
Hmm.
That's a huge reason why we're here
Hmm.
in a different way, obviously different format. But to your point, mentorship is very important, especially if you're missing one of those pieces in your life, and it might help you to be a little more grounded as you learn to grow and evolve into a young man or young woman as you get older.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that at all.
No, that's good. That's solid right there. Well,
Okay.
this might be, look, this might be, that may have been the alley. Let me see if I oop it. If I'm jumping, just pull
Okay.
me back in.
No, you're
So
good.
that's why I ended up getting into education, was that reason right there.
Beautiful.
Um, I was working for Nike. I was a manager, and some things was going a bit sour. I was about a week out from getting married, and I quit. I was like, this ain't, and I don't quit. I'm one of them. We ride or die. Like, you're gonna have to fire me. Like, I don't quit.
Yeah.
But I quit, and I was like, I'm about to get married. Like, I gotta I gotta figure out how to provide for my family.
Right.
So, and my wife at the time, she was freaking out. How you gonna do that? She knew the story. She knew what was going on. So, like, I needed to go.
Right.
Um, they had a great Florida teaching over here by Universal Studios. So I put my resume together, got on my best shirt and tie, walked up in there like, I'm a teach, because I know how to mentor people.
Right.
I've been doing that in church for forever. Like I can do this. I'll learn how to teach, not a big deal. And I walked in, it was so many people, I was so scared. And I walked up to the only person that they have nobody at their table, and I sat down with them, gave him my resume, and it was a Southern Belle, Dr. Cecile Diaz. She thank God for her. Um, I sat down with her. She was opening up a new school, a K-8 school, right from where I live at,
Okay.
and which I didn't know either. Like I just sat down with her, I had no idea. And she was like, "Well, we're opening up a new school on such and such road," and I was like, I live on that road." And she was like, "Oh, really?" And I'm like, "Yeah." She's looking over my resume, and she's like, "You're not quite what we're looking for. Like, we need some seasoned teachers, new school." I was like, "No problem." And she's like, "I have nobody here. Do you want to practice interviewing?" I was like, "Sure." Hour and a half later, she offered me a job. She offered me a job as a teacher, as a fifth
Beautiful.
grade teacher. Yeah. So I went on my honeymoon, and the day I got back, it was pre-planning. We're in. I'm trying to figure out how to be a teacher, and I tell
Right.
these jokes. So my degree is marriage and family couples therapy with an endorsement in school counseling. I was working on those two degrees when I started teaching. I had a
Got it.
year done. I had 2 more years left to go. Um, and I say that to say I know how to develop relationships. So that was my mindset when I went into the classroom. I was like, I got to get these parents and these kids to love me because I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, and I need them to give me some grace and some
There you go.
forgiveness. And
Right.
that's exactly what they did. My kids would run through a wall for me, but I was still learning how to teach, right? I know how to run groups. That was part of my systems training and
You're right.
counseling therapies and modalities and things. Like I know how to do that. I can run a group, but I didn't know how to teach the content. Like I was having to figure that out. So there was this one time I taught all subjects. There was this one time, RJ. There was one time I taught this math lesson. I was doing the intro. I was up at the board working it out, boom,
Yeah.
asking questions. Yeah, go write that up on the board. Bam, bam, boom, boom. I'm thinking I'm like, I'm killing this lesson. A little girl in the background, Jasmine. Jasmine raised her hand. A little Latina. She said, "Mr. Cook, that's wrong." I said, "Yeah, what you talking about?" And she said she worked the whole problem. And I stepped back from the board, and I looked at the board, and I looked at her. I looked back at the board, and I said, "Jasmine, you know what? I'm dead wrong right now. I done taught y'all a whole lesson the wrong way." I said, "It's lunch. Y'all gonna go to lunch. Mr. Cook's gonna get right. We gonna figure this thing
Figure
out."
this
I had
out.
so
Yeah.
many times like that where I had to. I'm learning on the fly, but I will say this: my kids was always tops in our district for their FCAT scores. I ended up moving down to third grade. Did that for a few years before I became a school counselor. But my whole thing was education was a front for me to be able to mentor students. And just like you experience, I tended to get the black and brown students more often than our other teachers, and I would get the problem kids more often than our other teachers because I knew how to work with those kids. One, because my race plays a part.
Yes,
Two,
it does.
because I'm a strong male presence. And three, I actually turned out to be a pretty decent teacher. So it was like this triple threat for them. And my last couple of years at Bella Lago, I started a mentoring program, and they literally, I'll never forget this. Shaquila Henderson, shout out to her. She's actually a principal out in Orlando at a private
Mm.
school. She said, "Cook, when I became a school counselor, first thing she tasked me with, I need you to take the baddest kids up in middle school and get them right." And I looked at her like, I don't even know what that looks like. I don't know what I'm doing.
You know what you're
Whatever,
dealing
we're
with.
gonna figure it out. Yeah, we're gonna figure it out. So all but one of my boys, I had 15 consistently every year. Once a class left, I added on boys because I high needs. I felt like I couldn't do more than that, although I wanted to. But all of them, we reduced their referrals down to one on the whole year, where they had like one a week.
Whew,
Um,
that's
we
significant.
Yeah, we increased their attendance. 85% of the school year they were in school. None of them had less than a C. And as I said, only one kid ended up getting kicked out. And a few of them I keep up with. They're doing well. They have families now. They're professionals, things like that. But RJ, it was just as simple as I taught them manners, and we had conversations. We used Why Try curriculum. And it just has those tough conversations about life, and how to problem solve and critically think and how to deal with conflict. And I legitimately, they walked around with the check sheet. Did they hold a door? Did they say yes ma'am, no ma'am? Were they in dress code? Were they polite to fellow students when a student maybe tried them? How did they respond? Like, I had all these little markers of like, just manners, that, and that's all it was. That's all I did
Mhm.
with them. And then every month we had like pizza and just had guys chat. And then once a quarter, I take them to some special place. There, the end of the year, we went paintballing, which was funny because you get the hardest boys out there get hit by a paintball and they turn in to little babies
Like,
crying and stuff. Like,
uh,
oh yeah, it was my hardest kids broke when we were out on the paintball field. But that was what I use education for. I use it as a front to
beautiful.
mentor both male and female students, because we just talked about this. The other side is, do you have a positive male role model in your life that can
Yep.
teach you this side of the world? So um,
Absolutely.
I did that, and I stayed because I said this to you, like, I'm that positive representation, right? Like, I got locks. I'm a little swaggy. I still speak your terminology, but then I can flip it and I can be super intelligent. I can speak in this circle and that circle. And it's like,
Right.
wait a minute, Cook looks like what I see in my hood or looks like what I see on TV, but he's here, like in the flesh, like
He's
at our
real.
school. Yeah, like this is real. Like, I can come up to Cook and be like, yo, this is what I got going on in my life. Well, father sold crack. I ran with the dope boys when I was in middle and high school. They lived in my neighborhood. I never got into drugs, but those are the fellas that looked out for me. So
Right.
I'm gonna ride with them because they protected me, right? Um, so we can have those conversations. Oh, such and such tried me. Well, let's talk about, some of the laws
Mm.
of the street. If you approach it this way, here's the results. If you approach it this way, here's the results. Which one gets you more respect at the end of the day? Like, we having these conversations, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep it real with you. I obviously made it out. I didn't go into prison, which I'm supposed to be in prison. At the time, I'm married. I got 3 kids. I'm associate pastoring at a church. Like, I'm being a successful, positive role model in the community. So I did the work. So if you're
Right.
interested in knowing how to do the work, then we can have those conversations, right? So I stayed in that area because that's our most vulnerable area in Osceola County, mainly because I felt like that my higher purpose was to be a positive male role model, where if mentoring was a door open for a student and they wanted that, then I would gladly provide that for them. So I didn't have to
Mhm.
join a boys club or boys and girls club or
Right.
YMCA or any special mentoring program. I became a teacher so that I could mentor students and figure out how to teach so that I didn't screw their academics up.
No,
That's why I went into the field.
no, that makes perfect sense. You already answered my next question, so good. You'll keep that rolling along, but I do want to touch on some of the things you said, though. I mean, number one, shout out to you for being willing to work in the school, because, like we were just talking about, there's not enough men that do it. I have a client who I work with pro bono who is a teacher, is a black male teacher, and up in Tallahassee. And I understand a bit about some of the challenges that teachers face. I actually give him this paradigm a lot as I talk about, he's in a female dominated field, I'm in a female dominated field. So there's
Mhm.
certain things that we can inherently understand about each other and how it might be different. I want to ask you a question before I give you more feedback, because I'm curious what you would say, because I know what he said. When it comes to troubled students, particularly if you're talking about troubled male students, do you think that part of the reason that they maybe get those referrals or they're being escorted out of the classroom, do you think any part of that has to do with who's teaching in that classroom and with their ability to maybe relate to some of the circumstances that that young man or young woman may be dealing with in their personal life?
I think the appropriate answer is yes. Not
Okay.
in all cases, but in many cases for sure. I mean, and the data national wide shows that. So that's not like, I'm not saying it's not a hot take from me or
Right.
anything
Right.
super controversial. I mean, the data shows that black and brown males specifically are written up at a disproportionate rate compared to their female counterparts and their white counterparts. So
Right.
I mean, that's what the data shows, and it has effects on long-term effects. Like, our black and brown males are not going to college. It's a lot lower rate than their female counterparts, their
For
white
sure.
counterparts. So it definitely what happens in the K-12 system, to your point, it does have some long lasting effects for sure. But you know, the other side of that too, RJ, is you have people that look like you and their experience. I mean, I was just having a make, and maybe I'm pushing it, but let me just toss this out here. And if we
Go
want
ahead.
to scrap it, we can scrap it. But I was just having this conversation with a good friend of mine. We were talking about what it means to be black and how people define this differently, and how my black experience may look completely different than your black
Correct.
experience, right? And you
Correct.
can use that for any race, but since we're focusing on people of color right now, we're going to
Right.
stay in this realm, right? So I've run into black educators that have a very different experience, black experience than what I had, and then what their students have. So even though in your mind it's like, oh, they look like me, their experience is totally different.
Absolutely.
They can't even connect with the student at the level that they are, right? So I
Right.
say
Right.
that to say, because I want to make sure that we're clear. Like, we're not saying, oh, it's because they're white teachers in there. Because listen, I got a white educator that's right down here from the street from me, Mr. Meechin. He was my former principal. That if that ain't if that ain't one of the most brothers that I know up in his piece. And his work is primarily with black and brown students. Like, he mentors black and brown kids, and it's the way our students gravitate to him is absolutely insane. So
No
we're
doubt. No
not
doubt.
saying that it's the general sweeping idea is, oh, if you're white, you can't relate to black and brown kids, or if you're black,
Absolutely.
you can't. That's not what we're saying. But what we are saying, that there are times where we find who is in the classroom, because they don't empathize or find a way to connect with those students or try to
Right.
understand what their situation is. Yes, they will go to more punitive ways of punishing a student, as opposed to redirecting and actually, what I would say, is teaching. We're teaching academics, but we're also teaching life skills, and that means
Woo.
you're
Wait. Wait.
you're
Say that for the camera one more time, please, sir.
we're
I should
not
make sure.
just teaching academics, we're teaching life skills. So my job in the classroom is to prepare you for life once you leave the K-12 system. So I need to know how to equip you academically, if that's the route you want to take, but I also have to learn how to equip you socially, because you're going to leave me, and if you show your butt out in my classroom with that anger because I said something you didn't like, when you get out into the real world, you're going to get that times 10. And I got to make sure you're equipped so that you don't respond ill and have consequences that you'll further regret, right? So
Absolutely.
and I think my advantage was because I was a counselor, so it was easier
Oh,
for me to
I
take
have
the
no. I have no
responsibility.
doubt that that played a significant role.
Yeah,
No
yeah.
doubt.
We would have family time. We would have family meetings in my classroom. Like, we would have those discussions, and really process emotions, process social skills and things like that. That was important to me, and that's what made my classroom, like, it was like a family. My kids were open with me, honest with me, with each other. We didn't have fights. We didn't have a lot of arguments. We had a lot of fun. I'll tell you this one thing, because I know you're about to say what you're about to say. So it's funny, because I just got nominated for this fellows program with NCAN, and a lot of my kids that I taught saw the post, and they're coming out the woodworks right now. RJ, like, I don't do what I do for accolades. People that know me
Sure.
know my head's down, my hands on the plow. Like, I'm working. I just work. Like, I just want to make impact and change. I'm like in the trenches
Correct.
doing whatever I need to do. So it was good for me to see this. My kids are coming out like, oh my gosh, that's the best teacher I've had, best counselor I've had. Do y'all remember when we used to have family meetings? Do y'all remember when Mr. Cook would just swallow a cupcake whole when we used to play shoe jackers at the playground? Like, all this crazy stuff that I forgot that I did with them. When we would do science experiments, and it would be a mess in the room, and like district people would come in, and he'd be like, oh, we about to get in trouble. Like, that's just how we rolled. I'm glad that my kids had a positive experience. And in part, it wasn't just academics, but I had to meet them where they were as people, you
There
know?
you go.
That to
No,
me is
that's
so
big
important.
facts. Big facts, man. I definitely want to support and encourage everything that you just said there. And I definitely appreciate the clarification. I often say on pretty much every episode that black people are not a monolith,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
like you were saying earlier, the brother I was speaking about, he's of Jamaican descent. So there's a slightly different angle in how he grew up and how
Mhm.
actually that plays a role in how he how he teaches and how he handles it. And so I like to always distinguish that so that people understand just because you're in the skin does not mean that you inherently understand all of my lived experiences. What it can mean, though, is there are some commonalities that
Yeah.
we do experience, and it helps to not have to always express and articulate that,
Yeah.
right? It kind of
Yeah.
saves a little bit of time. We can kind of jump into the meat of what are you struggling with? What are you having difficulty with? How can I help you?
Yeah.
But to your point, the reason why I asked you that question is because, again, I'm not like an educator, but I've spent a fair amount of time both in higher ed and obviously being around K through 12 students. And it's been just general observation, I would say, that young men are perceived being more aggressive and angry and hostile. Now, to be fair to the probably the female teachers, I can understand that because a lot of the environments they come from. And when
Hmm.
environments, I don't just mean like the hood they grow up in, because everybody didn't grow up in the hood. It could just be that the household that they in was very, very hostile,
Yeah.
right? Between mom and dad, like you were expressing from your lived experience. So that young man is bringing that into his school, or that young woman is bringing that into her school. So it's not to say that that 100% has anything to do with it, but I do think it's important to acknowledge that. And then if also to take it a step further, if I'm a young female teacher, perhaps, or just a female teacher in general, and we know I learned this, and this was years ago, that these kids are getting big, man. When I was mentoring in the 5th grade, there was like a girl who was like only a few inches shorter than me.
Hmm.
I was like, man, like, what are they putting in this food? You guys are growing up like that, you know?
Hmm.
And so I say that because I can understand a female teacher being intimidated, right, by some of her students, especially if they're, comparable size to you and they get upset. It's like, yo, this could be a problem.
Hmm.
So having a male teacher, again, I'm not trying to make a point that men are better than women, but
Yeah.
I'm saying in terms of like security, if I feel like I'm more under threat because these children are about my size, very, very upset right now, and I'm not sure how to de-escalate them, or what I'm doing to de-escalate them isn't quite working, I can understand you like calling security or needing to get that student removed. But I also know that men, we might have a different approach on how to resolve that issue, where we
Yeah.
might not have to recruit somebody else that might cause police to get involved, charges to be filed, a student getting kicked out of school. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
there's proper ways to escalate based on that situation. And I think men, we would handle it a little differently because we are a little bit safer to engage in those types of discussions or trying to resolve these very hostile, intense moments. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that. That's my perception.
No, 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 no. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I mean, it's tough in the environment we find ourselves in, like our current climate. Let me not say environment, our current climate, right?
Yes,
Because we got to be careful with what we say. We don't want to offend
sure.
nobody, but I think it makes rational sense that there are some things that women are more equipped with to deal with other female students,
Yes,
and men may be a little bit better equipped to deal with things that are for male students. And
yes.
just from sheer like you're bringing up the physical side of
Yeah,
things,
like size. Yeah,
yeah, just sheer size, right? Like, and you're a male student and you're upset, even if it's somebody that you respect, you may be physically imposing or intimidating at the moment, but a male teacher that might comparable in size or even bigger, it whether or not you want to admit it will change, it will
it
shift that
will.
interaction, right? So
Thank
just
you.
like
Thank you.
just side or reputation, like I know so and so down there, I know about him. Just sheer reputation is kind of like, oh yeah, yeah, you know what, yeah, Cook, you know this. No, I'm ready to talk. Yeah, yeah, we can talk about that for sure. Like, it just makes sense to me, just
Yeah,
a pure
absolutely.
rational sense. So yeah, I'm
Absolutely.
with you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And of course, like, I'm very, trust me, I'm very mindful, not because I'm like nervous about what I say, but I make observations, like I'm not in the education space. I'm not going to presume, but I've spent a fair amount of time in there. And yes, as you just pointed out, I agree. I think if you have a man, not that you have to be like 6'5" or something, but I think we tend to command a certain presence.
Yeah,
And if a young man is upset, I'm not saying that he's not going to still be upset, but I think there's a greater propensity to get him to calm down
yeah,
because there's another man he's conversing with versus a woman he may not, that might represent, not to go too deep, but that might represent like his mother at home. And maybe his mother shuts him down often. So then he's looking at this teacher
mm,
as like an avatar that represents the way his mom is. And maybe dad's not around. But
yeah.
then Mr. Cook comes in, he's like, oh, okay, it's a serious business.
That's cool.
And of course you're inviting, you're warm. You're like, hey bro, like, what's going on, man? Come sit down. Let's chop it up. Let's talk.
Yeah.
And it feels more comfortable to maybe engage in that. So instead of me throwing the chair, throwing the desk, getting handcuffs put on me and taking a juvie, maybe I just had to step out of the classroom for a bit so I could cool down,
Yeah.
and then I can come back and continue on with my day. I
Yeah.
make that point because, again, I'm talking sort of about the environments that we're in and the lack of male leadership, perhaps, and from a teaching standpoint,
Yeah.
that representation isn't there. You agree with me there that there's much more female teachers than there are men.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
My
think that
colleague
I think that can play a role.
Yeah, my colleague I was talking with the other day, and we are talking about Black experiences. She said this, and I need to look it up, but it feels right. She said this is 85% female. I mean, education is 85% female, and I would venture to say that in the counseling world, it's probably somewhere close to that for a male, and it's
Oh,
probably
it's
way
it's
higher
it's
when we're
it's,
talking
it's
about
higher.
Black males
Oh yeah,
or
oh yeah.
males of color.
No, we're comparable. I would say about 90 to 95%. And as a man of color who, especially like us, I'm a percent within a percent. Like I'm
Right?
very, very small. And I know this not because let me be clear. This is not to big myself up.
Yeah.
You know how I know? It's because when people seek me out, I listen to what they say.
Say yeah.
You know how long I've been hunting to try to find somebody like you?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Telehealth sort of changed the game. Because
Yeah.
before, just to be clear for those out there that don't know or that not sought out services before, prior to the pandemic, not that telehealth didn't exist, it just, of course, wasn't as prevalent. Most
Right.
of the time, you only found a therapist within your immediate vicinity of where you
Yep.
resided,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Telehealth made it so now you have access to the whole state. So now
Yep.
I have some clients that are not like, I'm based in Orlando. So I have some that are outside of just this environment. But I say that because that's what I would hear from them. That's how I know. It's
Yeah.
not me thinking like I'm special.
Yeah.
A lot of us are just because there's so few of us that we're usually in hot or high demand.
Yeah.
So yes, I think it's from my understanding, it's very comparable to the school system. And I will even add, now this is on the higher ed side, but I had this conversation. One of my fellow colleagues who I interviewed a few episodes back, we were talking about this over at UCF, and I told him I didn't have my first Black professor, male professor, until graduate school. And ironically enough, he taught my multicultural counseling class. I don't know if that's a shock to anybody, but it was just very interesting that it took me going through that much education to finally see somebody that somewhat looked like me. Like he looked like one of my uncles. I think we might
Mhm.
actually be related, but that's a side note. That's a side note. But it was awesome to have that, especially being in a female dominated profession, meaning majority of my classmates were women, or
Yeah.
white women.
Yeah.
And again, this is nothing against them, but it's about when you can have a bit of that shared lived experience, it helps whether you agree with it or not. This is not to say counselors, teachers cannot empathize with their students who do come from different backgrounds, but we also got to be real though. When you have a lot of that lived experience, man, it does make it a bit easier.
Yeah.
Like even when I listen to your story, I can't wait till people play back and listen to what you said. That's why I didn't interrupt you at all. When you went in and you were talking about your family, I could just imagine how many young men can relate to that story.
Yeah.
I can just imagine. And like, yo, and he turned out like that. Wait, go back, summarize what he said, draw out a picture board, put all the stuff that he said he went through, and somehow that equated, right? Math equation. Somehow he got over here, no lockup, with his family, good family man, great job, want to be impactful in his community with young men in particular to don't not maybe have to go through some of the same challenges he went through. How did that happen when so many don't? How? I think it's important again to hear those stories so we understand it doesn't have to be your outcome. It is difficult. Let's not get it twisted. It is difficult to not go down those paths
Hmm.
because in some cases they are kind of laid out for you. That's why we talk about the school to prison pipeline. It is very likely that those things can happen to you, but it doesn't have to. But you need mentors, you need guidance, you need people, older people who care about you. If you're not getting that from, let's say, your family, your immediate family, you
Yeah.
need those people to give you the game, to give you that guidance, to give you that wisdom so that you can choose a different path. because a lot of us don't have that luxury. So we just make the same mistakes. And then
Yeah.
because we're not, now I'm kind of pivoting to what men we usually don't do. Because we're not comfortable and we're taught to never be comfortable to express ourselves, we don't give our young men the game.
Mm-hmm.
We don't.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it could be pride, could be embarrassment, could be shame, could be guilt. But a lot of those things create walls that make it very difficult for us to open up to them, to tell
Mm-hmm.
them where we screwed up, or the guys I used to run with, or the way I used to treat women, or the environment I grew up with my family, and the choices that I made. If I'm unwilling to give them that game and that experience, they're in many cases doomed to repeat the same. And I feel like we can do better.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want to piggyback or add anything to that.
Yeah, I was. You said something that connected to when we were talking about education
Mm-hmm.
and boys regulating their emotions and stuff. I think what often happens is we do a disservice to our boys to make it not okay to talk about emotions. One, and or it has to look a certain way. Two,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then underneath that, the intentionality behind that. Because when I reflect back on on me growing up, good
Yeah.
student, but I had these big emotions. I did not know. I didn't know how to communicate that. In fact, I say this because we're healed and we're past this. But my
Right.
mom's favorite word for me growing up was pussy all the time. If I show any emotion, I was a pussy. I tore my Achilles tendon, RJ. Was in
Wow.
sixth grade. I tore my Achilles tendon. I said, "Ma, something ain't quite right." And she said, "Quit being a pussy." That was like the go-to. But I mean, I get it now. My mom, she was busting her ass, working 3 jobs, doing what she was doing. Like, who has
Mm-hmm.
time to deal with a young man's emotions, right? And I'm emotional.
Ooh.
I'm emotional. I know this about myself. I'm emotional. I'm very in tune with my emotions. I know that I'm a unicorn that way when it comes to being a man. Like I'm very much that way. My youngest son reflects that part of me back to me. I see that in him.
Yeah.
But at that time, like, who wants to take the time? Who has time? Like, quit it. That's just the go-to. Quit being a pussy. Quit showing your
Right.
emotions. Suck that junk up. You know what I'm saying? So it's funny. It's interesting to me. I think the conversations around like social emotional learning and stuff, and that there's all of this. It's such a hot button topic to me, and I'm like, okay, you don't like the phrase, but who in their right mind says we don't want to teach our young men and women, but especially our men, how to regulate their emotions? Because what happens, RJ, we don't teach them as kids, then they become men and they run through all these relationships with destruction left behind them because we didn't teach them how to even have a mature conversation, how to be able to hold space for their feelings, their partner's
Correct.
feelings, and or their friends' feelings, and to navigate that. We haven't done
Fact.
we messed that up. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So then
Yes.
it takes them, what is it? It's like men, just marriage. Not that everybody has to get married, but I
Right.
think it's by like their fifth marriage where they finally settle down, and it comes way later in life. So we have done them a disservice, sent them out into the adult world and said, take the next 20, 25 years to figure that out
Yeah. No,
and
you're
break hearts, break people's hearts and feelings on the way,
right.
because we didn't teach you how to handle all of that when you were a child, because it's too difficult. It's taboo. Like
No, no,
that
no.
doesn't sit well with me.
No, 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 no. And I want to echo exactly what you just said, because that is like one of the biggest platform issues and why I'm here. Not only in my therapy work, but in this platform that we're creating, in this space that we're creating. I see all the after effects, everything that you just described, right? Because of the work, the nature of the work that I do, I see the side effects. I see what happens when you teach a young man to suppress, and I can speak from my own lived experience. And let me make a generalization. These are observations that I have made that I've been fortunate enough to make by the amount of people that I've been able to work with and talk to. Okay. one thing I always like to point out, in my experience, it's not even a issue within the United States. This is a global issue in terms of gender roles. When it comes to young men, I'm going to try to summarize and synthesize what you just said, sort of the lens and how I express it. We want young men and men to behave a certain kind of way in terms of being emotionally intelligent, being aware, being expressive, being vulnerable. But we do not create the right conditions for them to learn.
Facts.
Everything that you said, going back to what you said in the very, very beginning of this episode, there was no part of that conditioning that says, hey, son, be open with me. Talk to me about what's going on. The first thing that you said that I remember from your father was, I don't have time for you. That's the effect that it
Mm-hmm.
gives. I don't have time for you. If I don't have time for you, I definitely don't have time for how you feel. So shut that down.
Yep.
Then what did you just say a moment ago about your mother? Don't be a pussy. What
Yeah.
does that mean to a young man? Nobody cares how you feel.
Yeah.
Keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
Suppress it effectively, right? We have so many expressions when it comes to young men to tell them to keep it to themselves. We say, don't be a girl, don't be a pussy, walk it off, man up, suck it up. All right. That's just a fraction of what we tell young
Yeah.
men.
Yeah.
What happens over time when you keep telling them that for their lifetime? Do not be shocked. This is the therapy side talking now. Don't be shocked when they're in a relationship and they don't open up. You can't be surprised.
Yeah.
Nobody ever made them feel comfortable. You got to think about it. Not you, but for the audience out there. If you don't get taught to be comfortable with your mother and your father, the people who birthed you into this world, they're usually the people that we identify with and think they're the ones that are going to give me the most grace, the most patience, the most
Mm-hmm.
love, the most
Mm-hmm.
empathy, the most compassion. When you don't get that from them, how do you think you measure everybody else in your life? Do you think like, oh, Mr. Cook clearly loves me? No, I'm going to be looking at him sideways.
Mm-hmm.
If my father didn't love me in the way that I would like, why would I expect Mr. Cook to? He's
Mm-hmm.
not even my father,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't create the conditions for young men to actually be able to be vulnerable. So what happens? As you just pointed out, and it was very accurate, we have failed relationships, failed marriages. Sometimes we have poor or non-existent relationships with children, and then the cycle continues.
Yeah.
So that's a big reason why I'm even here, why I'm reaching out to brothers like you, because I know that we need to see it. We need to see this level of vulnerability and that it's okay. It is absolutely okay to talk about how we feel, to talk about where we failed, to talk about how we got hurt, but then look at where we are today. Not that we're perfect, we're works in progress,
Mm-hmm.
but it takes continuous effort and work to be on this path, but that you are justified and valid in expressing how you feel. I don't
Yeah.
care about what you're told in your household. I'm telling you, it is okay to feel.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, I am one voice amongst a sea of individuals who still say that even though they want these type of men, they do not create the environments to create the outcomes for those type of men.
Yeah. Yeah. Completely agree.
Okay, beautiful. Because yeah, when you hit that, I'm like, that's in my heart, man. That's in my heart. As a father, especially, and I can imagine for you having. Do you have one son or two sons?
I have my oldest is a senior. My second child, my daughter, she's a sophomore. My youngest,
Okay.
he's a freshman. So I got three high
Okay.
schoolers.
Okay. But especially with young men, right? Like that to me is the essence of what we're talking about. I'm sure you might agree as a parent is, we take what we experienced growing up and we try to remix it in a way that we get a
Mm-hmm.
better outcome. We want like
Mm-hmm.
better relationships,
Mm-hmm.
maybe more comfortability, being open, things like that. So that goes to the heart of what we're discussing. Then we have to be, we as the fathers, right? Parents
Yeah.
in general, but in the fathers in this case, we
Yeah.
have to be intentional about creating that space for our sons so that they know that that's normal and that that's okay.
Absolutely.
To fight exactly what you outlined, to fight that. If we don't want you to
Absolutely.
have multiple failed relationships, not that you won't have any, right? We can't prevent everything, but that we can try to a certain degree to make you not have to go so far down that painful road that it might end up skewing your perception of reality.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to be willing as your father to give you my experience. I have to bare my soul to you so that you can learn. right?
Yeah.
You can learn from mine. And if you don't have a father, hopefully you have a male role model like Mr. Cook who may be willing to tell you a bit about some of those experiences or help you get yourself into therapy to learn to work out some of that stuff. So again, you don't have to have those outcomes. That's a big issue that I try to echo that sentiment every single time I'm talking to somebody because I know how hard it is. I understand fully the
Hmm.
mountain of opposition, you could say, that I'm
Hmm.
against because
Hmm.
I am only one person, I am one parent, I am one therapist. I am not everybody's not on this wave yet, but I'm hoping to encourage others to speak out. And if we recognize that we don't like these outcomes, we're tired of it, then we need to go back to the drawing board, understand we created these monsters.
Hmm.
Not that young men are monsters, but these situations, we created them to make them, in many cases, facilitate them turning out like this.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
hopefully I'll get off that soapbox now.
Well, I mean, to
um,
your point, right? With our sons, even my daughter, but
mhm,
when we're talking about boys, like
right.
I didn't. My dad wasn't around, like I said, but It's funny because I just took my kids. They met their black side of the family for the first time. I just took them to
Mm,
DC at the beginning of this year.
okay.
Um, and it's interesting because I not raised around my black family, but I was telling my partner, I was like, yo, it's interesting because I was like, you know how you talking about I'm extra? I said I'm around my black family, and I'm like, yo, they so extra. Like they extra about this is where I get it from. Like I'm not even around them, and I picked this up from them, but
Yeah.
they're very loving, very when I say extra, like celebratory. I celebrate people. It's just part of my it's part of who I am. We don't say
Yeah.
it often enough, so when I say it I make sure I put a little extra sauce on it, just to make sure people really get the message, bring a smile
Yeah.
to their face. And my family is very much that way. The black side of my family is that way. But I wasn't raised that way. I mean, my mom um if mom, if you ever watch this, I love you. We're beyond this. This is past. This is a matter of fact.
Right.
But she didn't. With my brother, she was super loving to my brother, but for me, she wasn't. In fact, she didn't say "I love you" to me until I was 25,
Mm,
and that was the first time she hugged me. Well, I take it back. The last time she hugged me, I was in fourth grade. That's when I was in an alternative school for knocking out my teacher, and they let me come back to my regular school. And she picked me up and she drove me to school and she gave me a hug. That was the last time she hugged me again until I was 25 when I
mm,
got my master's degree. That was the first time she hugged me. So I
man.
went all that
Was that-
time, 21 years, watching her be affectionate to my brother, super loving. But I'm here like, I got straight A's, mom. Like I'm taking care of myself. Like I'm doing big things. My brother's getting in trouble. Like you're super loving to him. Like what I got to do? Like I thought this is what I would do to get love, right? So when I became a parent, I said it was difficult. It is still a challenge, but it's a bit more natural for me. But my sons all the time, I love you. Give me a hug. Where you going? You, you just gonna walk away? You ain't gonna give me no hug? I don't care if you're freaking out. Let's go. I want a hug, right? Especially my oldest, I work with him a lot about vocalizing his emotions because he doesn't. So I see in him what I used to struggle with, but he's in an environment where I'm not suppressing it, I'm
Correct.
inviting it. But that invitation is there, but there still has to be where he accepts the invitation, because if I force
Absolutely.
it, then it's going to do the exact same thing where it's suppressed. Whereas my youngest son, RJ, I look at him wrong, tears, tears. I used to get so frustrated, like, boy, I need you to I can't have a conversation with you like this. And then it dawned on me about a year ago. So he's 13 now. So he was 12. It was about a year ago. I looked at him and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I had this wave of empathy run over me. And I was like, he's his father's son. He is his father's
Mm,
son. And I got to do a better job of teaching him how to process his emotions,
right.
communicate his emotions, and to be honest, to not be overly emotional, because you can be too far on the other side where emotions is just running your life and it's just you're
No,
vomiting it, right? Like,
there's guardrails, right? We have to have a
yeah, yeah,
balance
yeah.
there.
Yeah, exactly. So we're in the bowling alley and we're putting the rails up. So I'm trying to teach them how to
Yes,
stay within the alley, the lane,
bumper
right?
lanes, bumper
Yeah,
lanes.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's been my process with him. I've been a bit more intentional about that over since I had that revelation. I mean, I was before. Like I always told him, listen, your emotions are not a bad thing. It's just when they get skewed and that's what's running you, then we have a problem because you're running over people and doing stuff out of emotion that you're going to later regret, right? So, like with
Yes,
him, we
yes.
talk a lot. We talk a lot about emotions, how you feel, what you're thinking. Let's connect thought and feeling, which came first. Like he's my I can therapize with him and he therapizes back with me. But I think
Mm,
there's something to be said with our young boys, especially if you're a parent, to have those type of conversations.
yes,
Normalize emotions,
have to.
normalize talking about your emotions, and normalize having open discussions about how does this impact our relationship and what does this look like going forward. RJ, even this, as a father, I'm not perfect, bro. I mess up all the time. All
Same,
the time. But
same.
one of the things that I do with my kids, I just had this conversation with them the other day because I told them like y'all have to do a better job of owning your stuff. I said, I model for y'all. There is not I said, think back now. There is not a time where I mess up that I don't come back and apologize to you. As your father, my bad. I disrespected you. I could have handled that better.
Right.
My apologies. Do you forgive me? How do we move forward? I have those conversations with them because I know when they become adults, guess what? You're going to have those conversations with people that you love and are in relationship with.
Yes,
So
yes.
I practice that with them, and I think it's important as parents, as educators, as leaders to do that. Male, female, son, daughters, it doesn't matter.
Oh
Like
yeah.
we have to do a better job of that so that we have more fully functioning adults.
No, absolutely.
That
And
was my soapbox.
no, no,
I'm
no,
off of it.
no. Beautifully said. And I think even to echo that last point, right? Like you said, modeling. That that's a very good counseling term. We are always modeling,
Yeah.
right? When it's young person, like not necessarily when they're very very young only. Like especially if you're working in a school, right? Like you're that goes back to my point when I was talking about my client who is a teacher. I'm like I remind him of that often. I'm like, listen, both as parents and if you're fortunate enough to be a teacher, same thing. Like you're modeling appropriate behavior. You have to consider it like whether you like it or not. Like you have sort of a spotlight on you and the kids are watching you. They're observing you. They're looking at your demeanor, your attitude, your tone, and the language that you choose to use with them. And I challenge him, particularly because of the community that he works in. He works in predominantly Black and Latino school, if I'm not mistaken, and so a lot of them, don't have father figures around as much, and it can be rather rough. The backgrounds that they come from, the homes that they come from, and so we talk a lot about working through that frustration because as a teacher he's like, man, I really want the best for these kids, but it's hard because I'm sort of fighting their environment. And I'm like, yeah brother, I get it. It's hard because you don't get to control that. All we get to control is our reactions and responses to these different situations. But one thing that you can do, to echo your point, one thing that we can do, whether you're a teacher or a parent, he happens to be both, we can control the way that we choose to engage with them, the way that we choose to respond to them. So maybe they aren't getting the best role models at home, and they are being taught to yell and scream and curse and argue and fight. And you can't hold yourself to this standard like I'm supposed to fix that because that's not the purview of your power.
Yeah.
But you can express yourself in healthy ways that maybe you plant the seed that might seep in their brain for a while, and maybe it takes a while to manifest, but maybe it will at some point. Like, you know
Hmm.
what? Mr. Cook he was always reasonable. Like he didn't scream at me, he didn't holler at me, he didn't disrespect me. If he did, he came back and talked to me about it to make me feel better. He allowed me to speak openly. And a lot of kids, unfortunately, again, especially if we talk about boys, but a lot of kids in general, they don't get those spaces to do that.
Yeah.
So creating those environments, again, very very important. And absolutely what you said about it starts with us creating that environment with our children when they're young. And you talked about accountability, like I'm huge on that. That's a big one. One thing I'll just to give you some context for that, like my father would almost never take responsibility for anything, like almost never apologize. The only time it would be was if it was like a severe beating, then maybe I would get it. The same way I
Yeah.
would get love afterwards. So the context of it was so skewed, it was so warped that it warped me because of my perception, right? You only know what's normal to you is only normal to you because it's what you experience.
Right.
Everybody doesn't have the same experience growing up.
Yeah.
And so because of that, it was very difficult for me to understand that. So if I continue to stay in those types of environments, it's going to be very difficult for me to be open later on. But if we make the intentional effort to take accountability, to apologize, to say we're sorry, to offer love and condolences more often, not just in certain circumstances, the kids will be more adjusted,
Yeah.
right? They learn
Yeah.
to express themselves and then they don't need to punch a wall or kick a door or throw a desk or curse you out because they understand how to use their words. You hurt me when you fill in the blank.
Yeah.
I felt disrespected when you fill in the blank.
Yep.
That's more productive. That's productive dialogue. It's not just sitting here, no, 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 you said this, and, no, no, and then or the waterworks come down. You're just making me feel terrible about myself, but I have no idea how to give it back to you in a way that you can do something with it,
Right.
right? That we can actually resolve something.
Right.
So, very, very big point you said there. As parents, and even if you're an educator or somebody where you're maybe around a lot of children, you can one thing you can always do is model better behavior, and it starts
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah.
We got to be well. I'll say one last thing before we continue. When I talk about prioritizing ourselves, so I think of like a hierarchy, and I think of it in terms of, I usually say children, relationships, and then you. And at the top of that hierarchy always has to be you, and then it goes your relationship, and then if you have children, then it goes your children. And the reason why I say it in that order is because if you're not well, then your relationship can't be well because you both aren't taking care of yourselves. So then your relationship will suffer. And if the relationship's suffering, your children will suffer
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know how to model appropriate behavior to them. So
Mm-hmm.
then they're getting all these negative effects that we were just outlining. That's all they're going to see. And what do you think they're going to do when it's their turn to be an adult? Largely what they saw.
Yep.
So we always need to be our own top first priority so that we can be fluent in all these other areas and the different roles that we play.
Yeah.
So modeling appropriate behavior is one of those areas, and it's something that we can all do. Even if it's somebody you don't, maybe you don't work with kids, but you're just in a grocery store, you can still model good behavior to a young person every day. So I think it's just something to be conscious of, no
Yeah.
matter what we do. But
Yeah.
sort of piggybacking on that idea, because of a lot of the stuff that you experienced, growing up, that you outlined and that you described, do you remember at any point in time from that very young age up until now that you have sought out mental health services before for yourself?
Yeah. To be quite candid, it wasn't until year 11 of my previous marriage we ran into some stuff and started going to counseling, did like 6 to 8 sessions, and
Mm,
then we ended up divorcing a few years ago. And it was at that point, like, I realized I had took myself as far as I could go, as a man, as an adult, as a at that time as a husband,
mm,
um, as a father. And I was like, yeah, yeah. If this is not a wake up call, I need to get some things addressed. So I've been in therapy ever since the last 5 years. I've done individual work, I've done intensive retreats, I've done small group work. Like, it's part of my regular, it's how I take care of myself.
right.
Because I think we're, it's so funny, man. It's like, I just had this conversation with my partner last night. I was like, babe, listen, I'm just about trying to be the best version of myself. And I surround myself, the people that are my tribe are the people that are on that same journey, because I
Right.
find that not a lot of people are willing to do that work because it's tough.
Yes, it
Um,
is.
Especially when you have like experiences like similar to me, and it doesn't lessen or like make mine better or more traumatic than somebody else's, but like there is some stuff that I know it's a direct effect. It's a direct result. The research is
Yeah.
out there of my upbringing that I did a good job of staying away from some of the outcomes, but there was
Right.
some internal stuff that I did not do a good enough job, and I didn't have the tools that I thought that I had. I really didn't. So for me, this is part of that evolution of becoming a man, becoming a leader, becoming a partner, becoming a father, and being the best version that I could possibly be. So I don't
Yeah.
have a friend of mine ask, well, what's the end date? And I was like, until I feel like I'm whole, like I don't need my counselor no more. Not that I need her, but I do need her to continue to help me refine my tools that I have in my toolkit, so that I can show up as the best version of myself. And then when I don't, then I know how to regulate that and things of that nature. So
Oh yeah.
um, yeah,
Oh
man,
yeah.
it's something, what, at least once a month. Once a month is a part of my, it's like eating. It's once a month is my mental health meal that I have.
Nah, absolutely. And shout out to you. Thank you for saying that. Number one, these discussions that we're having, these aren't always easy things to discuss. It's never lost upon me when we choose to share. Because again, to our points of what we were talking about earlier, a lot of this is considered taboo because we're not raised to have these types of open dialogues. So I really respect and appreciate you for even saying that. And of course, your endorsement of therapy, because a lot of us, not because therapy fixes everything, but it does allow you the space to truly reflect introspectively and consider what are some of the things that you've gone through, that you've experienced, that may be shaping and affecting your reality in this present moment. And sometimes we don't, or not sometimes, and a lot of times we're not allowed or give ourselves a space to address them.
Hmm.
So that's a big part of, why I'm here, is to give some perspective, not because I know everything. There's so many things. I asked that question because there's so many things that I've had to learn in my process of therapy over the years to even allow me to be able to do it with somebody else.
Right.
Because I had so much stuff going on because of what I had to deal with growing up. I dealt with a lot of grief and a lot of loss early on in my life from a very, very young age. So, like, that certainly played a big role in how I saw the world and can make you bitter and aggressive and angry. And so, learning how to manage that, how to cope with that, how to regulate, very, very important.
Yeah.
And so I really respect what you said there. I hope any man, young, old, middle age, whatever, indifferent, would consider doing that simply because, like we said earlier, a lot of us are not given that space. So it's important to invest in ourselves. Give ourselves that space. If nobody else wants to be there for you or support you in that way, then give it to yourself.
Yeah.
If you come to somebody like me, not that it has to be me, but there are other providers out there, that you can find somebody in that space that will help you to learn how to navigate your emotions and what those traumatic and non-traumatic experiences were that you experienced through majority of your life, and possibly some connections with why you see the world the way that you do, with why
Yeah.
you parent the way that you do, why
Yeah.
you've had the failed relationships that you've had. Not because it's always your fault, but it's important to reflect on them to understand where we can afford to improve and grow and evolve, as you said beautifully. And I want to encourage and promote that more. So it takes, to me, maybe this is my selfish perspective, I think it takes brothers like you and me to put it out there.
Yeah.
Like, we have to be willing to sort of own that, so that way people can see they're fallible, right? We're
Yeah.
humans, but we're fallible. We make mistakes, and yet we can still be on a better path. We can still grow from them. We can still be better off. They're all learning lessons at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you support that, and I encourage anybody out there who has never tried therapy, and I get a lot of first timers, to consider trying it seriously. You might be very surprised in some of the outcomes that you might get, simply because you were given a space to freely speak and communicate about some of those things that maybe you've had, maybe in some cases some people have buried their entire life. Like, I've had those experiences, and it's sometimes hard. I have to kind of control my emotions because I'm watching somebody like almost open their eyes for the first time,
Hmm.
because they've been sitting in this closet, buried all these skeletons and just terrible memories that they've never let out,
Hmm.
or they let them out in these very unhealthy ways. So they never get addressed. They just kind of like
Right.
cause destruction, and then we move on.
Right.
So I really support everything that you said there, and I hope other people get encouraged as well.
Agreed.
Um, and then, sort of along that line, but going more into back to your upbringing a bit, because I like to talk about culture in the way that it shapes our perception. But in your case specific, I want to talk a little bit more about identity. because you made some very clear distinctions in the way both sides of your family is operated, right?
Yeah.
In terms of how, especially in terms of how they treated you.
Yeah.
Do you think there's any parts of those lived experiences that you had growing up that created some, maybe some difficulty, some challenge with how you saw yourself as you've gotten older?
Absolutely. I it's the old adage, a black and white biracial child. We ain't white enough for the black folks, and we ain't dark. We're too dark for the white folks. So, but what's interesting about that is that society sees me as a black man.
Right.
Like I have here in my community, I have about a handful of run-ins with law enforcement where it was racially profiled, and in one situation I almost lost my life. I thought I was going to die that night for sure.
Mm,
So I have those experience, right, that these cops didn't pull. I was speeding. I was 7 miles per hour over. That turns into 4 squad cars there, guns getting pulled out on me. Like, how do we justify that, right? That
right.
was clearly because I was a black man and I was a threat to them, even though part of what got me off was my squeaky clean record. Like, okay, I had a couple of speeding tickets on my license. My car is mad clean. I've got my college books in my book bag in my trunk and a CD case, like, or yeah, a pocket of CDs. Like, that's all in my car. Like, there's nothing. I have nothing, right? So it was a bit of a challenge to merge that. I would say, like, I had this affinity towards the black community because of my lived experiences, but I also know that I'm biracial. I have a white mom that raised me, and I wasn't raised around my black family, but yet I have older black folks in my life that mentor me, treat me as such. I'm accepted
Mm,
as such. And I'll be honest, RJ, I'll be 42 this year. I'll actually be 42 in a couple of weeks. Um, I would say probably 4 years ago, I probably came to grips with that. I know who I am.
mm,
I know what I stand for. I know what um, speaks to me, what resonates with me. And what's funny is that when I look back on my life as a professional, once I
yeah.
started working as a professional, all the spaces that I've been in, and it happened. I know I was like being intentional about it, but I've forgotten it until now that I'm in this space and the work that I'm doing that's super intentional, especially around black and brown males.
Mm,
Um, I have diversified or bettered the cause for black and brown students. My workspace has become more diversified. The church that I was at was more diversified. Programming within schools is closing the gap, as there is a disparity amongst our black and brown students. Diversified leadership. One of the things that I didn't say is I did start as a teacher, fifth grade, third grade, became a school counselor at that K-8 I was at, transferred to our second most vulnerable high school, um, became a college and career counselor there, got promoted to the district. For 2 years, I was the only black district administrator. Uh, Now it's diversified. My boss is a woman of color, black female. One of our other assistant superintendents is a Latina. Like, it's space is being diversified. Programs
right.
within my
Right.
community are closing the gaps for what I feel is are everybody's my people, but I have an affinity towards this because I'm a man of color, right?
Sure.
So it took me a long time to come to grips with that and to be okay walking in my skin, knowing that I'm biracial, but I'm black. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
I'm
that's big facts, man. Again, I appreciate the candidness, and it's interesting the way you describe that. Um, you meant when you first started talking, you sort of reminded me. I don't remember if my father told me this or it might have been him. Maybe it could have been one of my uncles, but I remember somebody telling me that whoever your father is who you are.
right,
In terms of like my father's black, so it's like, well, you're black. It doesn't matter
right,
who your mom is or where she's from. And so that's why that was like sort of my mentality pretty much majority of my life. But as you said, there was some challenges there because you didn't always fit. And I definitely had my fair share of that. And I will say, in fairness to my sister, she's a lot more fair skinned than I am. So she had a whole lot more challenge than I did. I fit a bit more, I think, than she did, but she
Yeah.
tried to overcompensate. So shout out to you, mom. But but the challenges were there nonetheless, right? Trying to be enough over here and then trying to be enough over here and not
Yeah.
necessarily knowing how you fit. And then obviously because we're not having these conversations with our parents, not getting any guidance. And to be fair to them, it would be very hard for them to be able to give guidance because it's not their lived experience. I was like, how do you talk about it? Like my son, I can talk to him about what it means to come from a multicultural environment because I've had to navigate it my whole life.
Right.
So I can give him some game to be like, you don't have to identify with every part of you, but just know that you are a part of all of that.
Yeah.
So I think that that's important to distinguish that. But it does play a role, and it can make it difficult in how you see yourself. And I even when you just said a moment ago about it being recent, that you got kind of comfortable in your skin. I mean, I had a similar epiphany. I'm 35. I had a similar epiphany, I would say a couple years ago. Because, like, for example, me growing up, my dad was maybe it was because of the Navy, but he was always like, you need to be clean cut, low, basically like a high and tight pretty much all the
Yeah.
time. I had,
Yeah.
I, I
Yeah.
had long hair a little bit when I was a kid, but once I got out of elementary, it was like, cut that down, keep it short. So it was always short. And it wasn't until just a few years ago that I actually allowed myself to grow my hair out because I had that notion in my mind that like it was going to be looked at as less than, or it wasn't
Hmm.
as I wasn't as well groomed as maybe my white counterparts. And
Hmm.
so I was kind of in my head about it. And then I fortunately I used to work at UCF, and I used to work with international students exclusively. So I got to meet a lot of brothers and sisters from Africa, from Ghana and Nigeria and all these different places. And they were very comfortable in their skin because obviously that's all they knew. And for
Hmm.
some reason, that just like touched me. It gave
Hmm.
me a higher level of acceptance of self. And so I started growing my hair out because I was cool with it. And now I feel like it's much more me.
Hmm.
But it took me a long time to get there because,
Hmm.
a lot of times the way we grow up is like, no, you kind of need to fit in more. And because you're an other, you really
Hmm.
need to fit in. And I say other
Hmm.
to clarify for those who don't know. When I was growing up, a lot of those standardized tests you had to take, there was no biracial, multiracial box.
Hmm.
So I used to always draw in my own box, or you had to check other.
Hmm.
So, not that you're not another, but back then, that's kind of how they looked at us.
Yeah.
And so it was, again, hard to formulate like who we are and how we identify and things like that. So I think and on a positive note, there are more kids now being born that are like us, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So we hopefully these discussions will be more commonplace,
Yeah.
right? Of how you not necessarily how you fit in, but how you formulate your own identity.
Yeah.
Because right, like you said, like you might identify mainly with the white side, you might identify with the black side. Understand they're both a part of you,
Yeah.
and then and from a society standpoint, they might look at you a certain kind of way. Because if we started getting to, which we're not necessarily going to, but if we started getting into colorism, then we start saying, like, are you white passing? Depending on how fair skinned you are, your hair texture, eye color. Um, I haven't had that issue, but we know that that exists within the Black community, even in Latino communities as well. The more fair skinned you are, the more European esque you look, the easier you can pass. So then you can kind of keep that ethnic side to the side, so
Hmm.
people don't know. But
Hmm.
I'm here to promote acceptance and encouragement for us to be our authentic selves, and that doesn't mean you have to embrace all parts of your culture because it depends on how you grew up. But I hope that people accept all the parts that made them. Whether you identify with them or not, that you accept that, like, yeah, these both are parts of me, and I love them because they made me. But I maybe identified more over here because this is the environment predominantly that I was exposed to when I was coming up.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
there's anything else that you think you need to add to that, or that you want to give some perspective on.
No, that was, you just
That's good.
summarized that
Okay.
perfectly. Yeah.
Okay, good. Because it's nuanced, right?
It
Like
really
I'm
is.
not I'm not an expert on this. It's very nuanced. This is a very very nuanced conversation. I
It
love
is.
talking about it because it's hard. It's very very hard to like. How do you figure out how you identify? It's very
It is.
difficult. I
It is.
mean,
And look, to be super candid, so and I have no qualms about this. I know why I did it. I'm comfortable with it.
Mhm.
But I married a white woman, and my kids have a white mother, white family,
Mm.
So when I talked about, it wasn't until a few years ago. Now, mind you, I'm about 5 years on my own, going through my therapeutic process and stuff, which really
Yeah.
helped all of that. I'm not gonna lie, I had while I was okay with it, I still had some shame around it, because I'm like, wait a minute, like, but I have this thing I want to put on for my people, but then I'm over here doing I like this, and now my kids are mixed, and they're not from a woman of color. Like, a lot of that is going on, and to be honest, I ain't really know who to talk to about that stuff. So I just
Yeah.
kind of, in my mind, mulling it over, and I should have just started therapy so much
No,
sooner. I'd have been,
no, I mean
I'd have
that's
been light
fair.
years ahead of where I am right now.
That's fair. But you know what I would say to you though, in all honesty, because this is to me, this is the nuance, right? Because I hear what you're saying. Like I want to say something to offer a different perspective on that, just real quick.
Yeah,
Because somebody might, somebody I can imagine somebody agree with that. Like, man, I want to put on for my people.
yeah,
Because I hear these discussions, right? Like I hear like more influential people talk about this. Like, if you really want to do well for the community, you better marry a sister,
yeah,
right? Like that. If you don't do that, you're not for the community. You're not for the
yeah,
culture. Like I
yeah,
hear those things, so I get where you're going from with that.
yeah,
But this is what I want to say to you though. But your mother was white.
yeah,
So if you saw, like, for example, not trying to put words in your mouth, but if you said like, but I love my mother and my
yeah,
mother's white,
yeah,
so why wouldn't I maybe not want my kids to have a white mother? I think you are well within your rights to say that
yeah,
because that was your lived experience. That would be like somebody telling me again, if some man told me like, well, you're not for the culture if you don't marry a black woman. I'm like, well, my mom was Latina. So am I not allowed to marry a Latina woman if I want to and procreate with them?
yeah,
You might say that's unfair, but that's because your mother was black.
yeah,
I get why you say that, but that's
yeah,
not fair to me,
yeah,
you know? And
yeah,
I'm still black, so then my kids are still going to be partially black. I can still raise them with those values and part of that culture.
culture.
It still encompasses them. You might, the only way that matters if you start trying to count percentages and all that. And I'm not going down that road. Like, are you a fourth? Are you a fifth? Are you an eighth? Like, I'm not going down that road. I'm like, hey,
Yeah,
like we said
yeah,
earlier, you half, you black. You a quarter, you black. If you look like you black, you're black.
black, yeah, yeah,
And if it, if it's in your family.
yeah,
So I just want to say that to you because I think, if there's any brothers out there that might feel some type of way about that, like I care about my community, I want to support them. I would say, me being me, I never want to be exclusionary,
yeah,
right? In these discussions, I never want to come across as I don't like our white brothers and sisters who do amazing work and they support us and a lot of the struggles that we face, right? I never want to come across that way because I don't believe in that.
yeah,
But what I also want to say is it's okay to also pay attention to those that are the most disenfranchised or the most marginalized. I think
yes,
that's also okay. And that's also part of my lived experience. So that's why I speak to it. But if I
yeah,
was half white or mixed with white, I wouldn't want to be like, well, I'm not allowed to embrace any aspect of being white because, well, this side is super disenfranchised. So I can't acknowledge that. I would say, no. If that's
yeah,
your people too, I think it's
yeah,
absolutely okay to embrace them,
yeah,
because you
yeah,
sort of need people on the inside, right? You need people to challenge their thinking, their beliefs. Who better in some cases than your family? Just like in the black community, it could be the same thing. You need brothers and sisters who are willing to like challenge things that maybe aren't the best for us.
yeah,
But if it's an outsider, as some people might perceive it as, they might be like, yo, I'm not listening to that. Like, you don't know my lived experience. Don't try to talk to me about what it's like. You
yeah,
might have all the statistics in the world. I don't care. But if a brother comes talk to you or a sister comes talk to you, you might be more receptive.
yeah,
So I want us to hopefully to foster a space where we can embrace all aspects of who we are. But in this case, you and I have chosen to focus on a particular area of our lives and our culture that we feel are in need. And I think
yeah,
that that's also okay.
yeah. I'm with you. There's the
Okay.
human race experience, right? And then there's
Yes.
your race or your culture that you're gonna
Yes.
put on for whatever that looks like. So
Yes.
yeah, I'm trying to connect with diversity is huge for me. So I'm trying to connect with everybody on a certain level, but definitely my affinity is towards black and brown people, especially black and brown males, just because, like you said, disenfranchisement, like that's where it's most. So
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful, man. No, no, discussion has been so helpful. But I want to end by asking you, like I typically do, what you see for your future. What other ambitions or goals that you have, either personally or professionally, that you really want to continue striving towards, or maybe something that you haven't even brought up yet that you're working on.
Yeah, I mean, really, I entered into this position 4 years ago. So again, 5 years on my own doing my therapeutic work and stuff. And I think this past year was the year that I kind of came into my own a bit.
Mm,
Again, head down. I just do work. But I realize the impact that I'm making and the connections that I've been able to foster, and the respect the work gets. So right now, the focus is really just trying to close I call it the post secondary attainment gap. Um, the trends in our nation right now is that students aren't going to college more. Black and brown males, if they do go, then they're going the technical college route. I don't really care where they go. I have this saying where, look, when you graduate sitting at home on your mama's couch eating hot Cheetos, playing video games, that ain't one of the options. So we got to figure out what this looks like for you so you can be a productive member of society. So
yes, sir.
yeah, really on my end, it's doing creating the programming and the infrastructure here within the district, statewide, and even national. Because I sit on a few committees and boards that stretch across the United States. I actually
Yeah.
sit on the board that stretches internationally as well. So just
Oh,
trying to
okay.
figure out what those programs and infrastructures look like to help students and families readily identify their passions and interests and create that programming that helps connect them to it, so that when they leave, they can be pursuing something that they're passionate about. Because if they're passionate about it, to me, that's where they're going to end up making the greatest impact, right? Not doing it because they
Oh, yeah.
have to do it or just because they have to provide, but marrying the two. I'm passionate about it and I want to be able to provide for myself, marrying the two and then pursuing that. So
Oh, yeah.
we have some programming that we're doing here in the Tri-County area, Orange, Osceola, and Seminole, focusing on our Alice families. I have stuff that I continue to do here in my district, bringing in organizations and things to provide programs to give our students immersive experiences and things to help inform their decisions. And the same thing nationally, like that fellows program that I was accepted to is our National College Attainment Network. I was one of 15 that was accepted nationwide, and I was the only candidate from Florida that was accepted. I don't
Beautiful.
know what the demographic makeup is, so we'll figure out male, female. We'll figure out what our races and things, ethnicity, what that looks like. But I get a whole year of leadership training in this space that I'm in for college attainment, post secondary attainment, to just help me better create those programs and infrastructure. So like things are just kind of all coming together this year. So it's just
Yeah.
getting better at what I've been doing. I've laid the foundation. Now it's time to build upon that foundation in the event that I'm not here. Somebody else can carry on that mantle. And more importantly, our families, our students that are in our community are able to access things that, like for me, I didn't have help. I want them to be able to say, nope, I had all the help that I could possibly get. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. No, that big, big, big respect there. Because it means, essentially you're continuing to build on this legacy that you're already laying out, like you said, right now. And I think that's really important. We need different people in different spaces. There's different ways for us to attack this issue. We have different skill sets, different career interests, but if the end all be all is we want more well-adjusted students, young people who are going to be productive members of society, as you said, on the emotional side, I can do my particular part on the therapy side. You can obviously do your part, since you sort of can walk in between both worlds, since you were trained that way, and
Mm-hmm,
leverage those skills and experiences in the educational system.
mm-hmm.
And we need other people in other sectors, right, to also play a role. It's not something that only one side of us is going to like completely resolve these issues. So I think it's important to support each other, right? Like one thing I've realized in my own space, because I work for myself, I'm a private practitioner, is the importance of community. And sometimes, from what I've seen, particularly for those of us that are trying to address these particular issues, like we're talking about with young men, is that it can be very isolating. It can be very lonely, because you want to do so much, you want to try so hard, the benefit of networking and creating that network of individuals who are all on the same page, but again, with maybe within their own sphere that they work in, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's very powerful. So that's one thing I've been working on by having a lot of these discussions, is trying to build this community of those of us that are interested in doing this type of work in our own particular ways, and how to bring us together so we can uplift and support each other, because the work is hard.
Yeah.
Again, this is we're talking about society, we're talking about families, all these things that we don't necessarily have individual control over. But if we can sort of aggregate more of us together, perhaps there's a way for us to be a part of that sea of change. So I appreciate you for not only the work that you're doing, but for the passion, that you have to want to create that type of change. I think it's important to leverage that in all of these different environments. I hope that you can tell I feel similarly in my space, because of what I've witnessed, not just as an individual, but also what I've witnessed in doing this type of work. Like we were talking about earlier, about trying to stop a lot of those negative outcomes that we see, that
Mm-hmm.
requires us, to do a lot of what I believe what we're doing here today. And I do believe we accomplished something today by creating this space where you are very open, and I very much appreciate it. And if you can't tell, I like to mirror that back so that people feel comfortable, and I hope there's some young men out there, or men of whatever age, and women, if they find this information valuable, to really look within and really reflect and be honest with some of the things that they might have dealt with. Because however you see the world right now, it doesn't have to stay that way. However you choose to behave and engage with people, it doesn't have to continue to be that way. But it does require us, as you said beautifully, to do our work.
Yeah.
Therapy is work.
Yeah.
Reflection is work. Growth is work.
Word.
None of it's simple, but it's beautiful when you continue through the process and you can see the change. You see, like, okay, I was here, like you said, like 5 years ago, I was here. And had I been doing some of this work, maybe some of the other things may not have happened.
Yeah.
But but I am here today because of this last 5 years of work that I have been doing in therapy. To me, that's powerful.
Yeah.
Somebody out there needs to hear that this man has helped push his life forward because he's been giving himself the space to do that work. And I hope that gives more people encouragement, because, especially for Black and brown men, we are the least likely to seek out help in general. Men in general,
Yeah.
Black and brown men especially, because there's a lot
Yeah.
of cultural added to that make it seem like you're more weak if you choose to take assistance of any kind. And
Yeah.
I'm here to also try to combat that as well. I don't know if there's anything you think that might need to be further emphasized when it comes to the young man and seeking out help at all.
First, let's start here. It's commendable what you're doing. So since we're putting this on, let's go ahead. You be all gracious to your guests and stuff, but we need to reach back and be gracious to you. It's commendable what you're doing, rounding out people to have discussions like this. And we might not see the immediate impact, but like you said, who knows what seed was planted, and what generational curse was broken, and what trajectory was changed because of the conversations that we're having. And that was because this was something that you were passionate about and sought out to do. So shout out to you, and the
Thank you, sir.
platform that you created and the work that you're doing within the community. That's all I'm going to say. That is how you end the podcast, is by thanking the guests for all of. I mean, thanking the host for all of you that are out there, because they don't have to do this. This takes work, man. There's a lot of work behind doing stuff like this and being
It
able to hold
does.
space for these conversations and things. But you have a passion and a vision, and this is helping to support that. So I know we just met not too long ago, but I'm super proud of you, super excited about the work that you're doing. So
Thank
thank
you.
you for having me on.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I know you said earlier, and I agree. We don't always like taking flowers, but I do appreciate it. Because you're right, it is a lot of work, but I do feel very impassioned to do something. I think a lot about impact and purpose, being purpose driven, and to me, I think this is why I'm here, to hopefully facilitate more of these conversations. 'Cause I think in counseling, I think that's a lot of what we do, is we
Mm-hmm.
facilitate conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to, to facilitate the type of conversation, to allow us to look within and to be comfortable, hopefully to draw some of that pain out so that people can see, not because it immediately benefits you to do that, but it allows you to invoke that type of process that makes it feel comfortable, that eventually makes
Hmm.
it feel safe. And then the
Hmm.
beautiful part, I will end on saying this last point, 'cause I think this is truly the beautiful part of what I've been fortunate enough to do, is when you get to connect with somebody because of that painful experience that you brought out. When you thought I was the only person that had that type of experience, and then you share it with your therapist, or you share it with, another loved one or somebody you just respect, and they're like, "Oh yeah, I've had a similar experience." You're like, "Whoa,
Hmm.
how how is that possible?" Because I literally thought I was the only one that went through that. And again, talking about community, that's the power of that, because you recognize that you're not alone, you're not isolated, you don't have to be afraid, and you can trust in other people who, not just because they have the similar experience, but they genuinely want to help you grow and evolve as you probably want to do for them. And I think that that's so powerful. And I hope to encourage more people through these discussions to do that. Again, not necessarily that you need to come on a platform and you need to discuss it openly, but at least, do your own work, with, maybe you start with a loved one, a family member, a friend that you hold dear and you respect their opinion. Maybe you start there, and that helps set you on the path to get your own therapist and do your own work.
Hmm.
Because that's why we're here, is to support you in your own development and your own growth. And that's a big reason why I like having these discussions, is because I get to learn so much from you guys and women that I've been fortunate enough to speak to and that have made the time to speak with me, because so many times we don't get to see that, again, that representation.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that I got to see a brother like you on here, and I hope that anybody else that maybe is interested in education or career development or career exploration, you need to look for my man Anthony, because he's obviously got a lot of experience in the field, and see that it's real. He's a real person who really does that work. And if you care about the next generation, about teaching or being in the classroom of any kind, I hope that they may consider reaching out to you, and just recognizing that it is a real profession that you can pursue. We don't all
Hmm.
have to be musical artists and athletes. Not that there's nothing wrong with those things, but we can be more. And I want to challenge all of us to do that. So thank you again for being here, man. I hope anybody who got some value from watching or listening to this, please consider liking or subscribing, because it helps to like produce more of this content. It does take considerable effort, but I really do love what I'm doing. And I hope that you guys get to benefit from these discussions. So until then, I'm RJ. I'm going to sign off and say peace out.